since I was a little girl, I've wanted to be a teacher. When I was young, I played at it, hauling my two younger sisters down the basement to be my students, while I stood in front of a little blackboard, instructing them in spelling or phonics, or whatever it was I had just learned in school myself. Today, I am one of the lucky ones. My childhood dream came true, and I'm now a professor at a fine university where I've taught for the last 25 years. It's been a good career, and I'm proud of my work. But at this stage of my life, I find myself looking back and reflecting on my long years in front of a classroom, pondering on those times when I've truly made a difference in my students' lives and when I have not, and why that was so. Although our subject matters differ considerably, you and I have a lot in common. While I'm a marketing professor and you are catechists, all of us Catholic men and women gathered here today want to be catalysts that help change our students' lives for the better. And so in the interest of our shared vision, I'd like to ask you to spend the next half hour reflecting with me on how we can make sure we always bring our best selves to our work and with God's help, make the biggest, most enduring differences we can in the lives of others. So let us begin far away from the Archdiocese of Chicago in Thailand, a place I've never been, but only visited through the stories of a good friend. He told me a particularly lovely one about the time when he traveled to the outskirts of Bangkok, to a place that was dense, with vegetation and where the heavy, hot, humid air made it almost impossible to sleep. After tossing and turning in his bed for hours, he finally fell asleep, only to be awakened at dawn by a popping noise. Pop, 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 like so much popcorn exploding in a pan. What was it? He got up and looked out the window and watched as scores of water lilies surrounding his cabin burst open one after another as the strong light of the dawn hit their tightly closed petals. It must have been an amazing sight. I paint this image for you not just because it's a marvel of God's creation, which it most certainly is, but because it's a perfect metaphor for the effect we all hope to have on our students, whether they are children or adults, and whether we encounter them in universities, Catholic schools, Sunday school classes, youth missions, or in RCIA. We want them all to burst open to new possibilities, and in your case, you're on the extra special mission of helping them awaken to the most joyous possibility of all, to respond to God and to open wider to Him all their lives long. I think we can agree this is what we want to do, but is it what we actually do? Perhaps it will help us to think through that question if we make a distinction between the task of awakening and the task of instructing. Between the awakening we call evangelizing and the instructing we call catechizing. In the secular world, it's the difference between educating and teaching, although we tend to use those two particular words quite interchangeably these days. But at their root, educating and teaching are words that represent distinctly different ideas. To educate comes from the Latin verb educere, which means to draw forth, to lead out, to awaken, or to inspire. Whereas the Old English root of the word teacher means to show, point out, demonstrate, train, or to give instruction. The ancient philosopher Socrates seems to have been trying to describe this difference when he said, "Education is the kindling of a flame, not the filling of a vessel." In Socrates' terms, then, we might say that an educator kindles the flame while a teacher fills the vessel. Or in terms we're more used to in this setting, we could say an evangelist kindles the flame and a catechist fills the vessel. Both jobs are essential. If our students' lives are meant to serve others, the way a Japanese tea master might serve a cup of tea to an honored guest, then the tea kettle needs to be filled and a fire needs to be lit under it. One without the other cannot result in a cup of tea. But which comes first? Do we fill the kettle or light the fire? If we are to go and make disciples of all the nations, then it seems to me our first job is to awaken the potential to respond to God planted in each of our hearts and stir up a yearning to know Him. When the yearning to know Him gets strong enough, we teach the receptive student how. First, we light the fire under the empty kettle, The hot kettle aches for water. Then we fill it up and the water comes to a boil. We catechists must be evangelists first, educators in addition to being teachers. If you've read Sherry Weddell's book, Forming Intentional Disciples, you'll know she makes exactly that point. Her research shows that often people don't progress in Christian discipleship because they've been instructed while they weren't awake, catechized but not evangelized. All of us who have ever stood up in a classroom know full well that nothing gets through to the student who is sound asleep. That student has to be awakened, set alight, drawn out over and over again. Then he or she can absorb instruction, shaping, and direction. Usually, though, we separate these two essential tasks and look to different people to accomplish them. That's not unreasonable, especially because many people feel their gifts are in one area or the other, but not in both. And among those, most feel they're good at catechesis, but not evangelizing. I can't possibly go out there and proselytize, they say. We fearful proselytizers need to hear what Pope Francis had to say about the subject at the 2013 International Conference on Catechesis. Proselytizing is solemn nonsense, he said. It makes no sense. Evangelizing is not proselytizing. What attracts is our witness. 40 years before that, in 1975, Pope Paul VI wrote the same thing in his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Nuntiandi. Above all, the gospel must be proclaimed by witness, he said. Modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it is because they are witnesses. Pope Francis says it again. Being a catechist means witnessing the faith. My friend Michael Gibson, who's our Evanston postal clerk and a minister at the AME Zion Church, agrees. The only God most people will see is the God in you. So let's set distinctions between proselytizing and catechizing aside for a moment and ask the more fundamental question, are we all capable of witness? The answer is absolutely. A witness, after all, is simply a Christian man or woman who walks his or her talk. He lives what he believes. Her life speaks. He proclaims the gospel without words, to paraphrase St. Francis, because he acts out its commands. Or as Pope Pius XII put it, speaking of Maria Goretti at her canonization, by her goodness, she taught the church. So if we are open to God ourselves, and if we watch over ourselves carefully, we witness simply by getting out of bed each morning and going about our business. Witnesses can't help but inspire or re-inspire faith. They live in a way that others admire and simultaneously find unsettling. And that unsettled feeling becomes like an itch that needs to be scratched. And so the process begins. An admirable life that unsettles. Our treasure house of saints abounds with examples. Who couldn't be astonished by the work of Mother Teresa or Dorothy Day, and at the same time be challenged by them wondering, what am I doing with my life? The parishioners at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina had exactly the same effect on me. They reacted to the shooting of their pastor and 8 other people by a young man hoping to start a race war, not with cries of vengeance, but with quiet prayer and loving forgiveness. I couldn't help but wonder, could I do that if someone I loved had been killed that way? I have been unsettled by friends who adopt children who are disabled, disadvantaged, or in some way completely unlike the ones they might have given birth to themselves. I am unsettled by people who finish a long day at work and then tend elderly parents or gravely ill friends with an energy and cheerfulness that seems superhuman. I have been unsettled by a friend who told me he had decided not to remodel his house and give the money to his church instead, because the capital campaign needed it more. In their individual ways, both big and small, it's apparent to me that these people are imitating the most unsettlingly admirable life of all, the life of the one who said, "There is no greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And I wonder, am I that kind of witness? Do I live my faith in a way that unsettles anyone? An unsettled mind becomes a questioning mind. Again, Pope Paul VI writes, through this wordless witness, these Christians stir up irresistible questions in the hearts of those who see how they live. Why are they like this? Why do they live in this way? What or who is it that inspires them? Why are they in our midst? I smile as I read these words because they're exactly the questions that came to my mind as I got to know Brad Bennett, a man I met at work. Before I ever knew he was Christian, I knew that he was different. At the time, I'd have said he radiated something. He was lit from within, and he simply fascinated me. He reacted to situations differently than I would have, more gently and wisely. He seemed always to know what to say to give someone encouragement. He knew how to stay calm in the face of a crisis and respond rather than just react. He knew how to ask a colleague a question that helped her see a solution to a problem. He never spoke badly of anyone. On the one hand, he was an ordinary business executive, but on the other, it was abundantly clear that he was unlike any other person I'd ever met. Finally, we sat down to lunch one day and I asked him, "Where does this light come from?" He simply said, "From Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior." He knocked me dead in my tracks. But because I respected his integrity, I was willing to let my curiosity start a conversation that led to lots of questions and answers, lots of back and forth, and a mutual sharing of experience. Because Brad made it safe to ask and learn, a bridge of trust was built between us, and I was on my way over the ravine that separated us to his side. My journey of conversion took its next step in an invitation to his church, Willow Creek, in Barrington, and continued on in scores of spiritual conversations that often started over breakfast and finished at noon. Brad walked the entire path of my conversion from atheist to Catholic with me, tearing up with joy as he watched one of the Father's prodigal daughters let herself be embraced and brought home. If I could have had anyone as my confirmation sponsor, it would have been Brad, except that he isn't Catholic. No matter. We are still walking together, talking as we go, and the light of his faith, lived out in his life, keeps my own heart expanding wider and wider. Witnesses are powerful people, although they may never know precisely how powerful they are. Regardless, a witness affects eternity. Look at the effect Monica had on her son, St. Augustine, and how his story of conversion has touched millions of people for more than 1,600 years. The witness of Louis and Zélie Martin warmed the child heart of their daughter, Therese, whose own little way became so powerful when it was published in the years after her death that she has earned a place among the doctors of our church. But we don't have to confine ourselves to these heavy hitters to see the power of witness. Ask any seminarian or religious novice about the genesis of his or her vocation, and you'll likely hear a story about a parent, teacher, priest, or sister whose own life of faith shed a light that forever changed theirs. And ask any faith-filled layperson what opened or continues to open his or her heart, and you'll hear another story of someone who unsettled them, fascinated them, and lit a pathway to Christ. Each of our little lives is full of raw power, much more than we ordinarily appreciate, as it became fearfully clear to me one day. Several years ago now, my husband and I helped care for a dear friend in New York during his long struggle with and recovery from pancreatic cancer, and through many setbacks and complications made even more challenging because he was trying to continue his work as a priest and seminary professor at the age of 82. After one of his rehospitalizations, the doctors didn't feel he needed to go to rehab, but said he did need a week of close care before they were confident he was out of danger. I volunteered to stay with him in New York that week and take care of him. The provincial of his religious community agreed, and the rector offered me a room at the seminary. During that week, I did things that all caregivers everywhere do for their loved ones. I prepared his food and helped him shave. I ran his errands, gave him medicine, talked to his doctors and visiting nurses, answered his mail, and we prayed the daily offices. Late one evening, as I was carrying a basin of dirty dishes down to the kitchen, I ran into one of the seminarians who offered to carry it for me. As we walked along together, he said, "You know, Lisa, we study love every day in our classes, but now we watch it walk the hallways. I will never forget this, not for the rest of my life." Just recounting that moment never fails to bring tears to my eyes because it was such a beautiful compliment. But I have to tell you, it also filled me with another feeling that's hard to describe, except it was something like fear. In that moment, I suddenly realized that in my behavior, in the way I live my faith, God has given me real power. The power to affect other people. In this case, to encourage a young man at the dawn of his vocation by doing something as small as washing the dishes of a sick and elderly priest. And dear God, if I have that much power to encourage, do I not have an equal and opposite power to discourage by failing to act in a situation with the love and kindness a Christian woman is supposed to have at the center of her very being? You bet I do. And the section on the causes of atheism in the Second Vatican Council document Gaudium et Spes explicitly tells us what's at stake. Believers can thus have more than a little to do with the rise of atheism. To the extent that they are careless about their instruction in the faith, or present its teaching falsely, or even fail in their religious, moral, or social life, they must be said to conceal rather than to reveal the true nature of God and of religion. Isn't that the most horrible thought? That I could be one who conceals the face of God by being careless, thoughtless, or behaving inconsistently with my beliefs? Yes, we little people have power, immense power to affect another person's experience of God. Does that frighten you? It frightens me. So if I am ever inclined to ask why the part of our culture hostile to faith continues to advance and hold ever greater numbers of people, and why so many others are apathetic or lukewarm, why other people's hearts are simply tight shut, then I'm afraid I have to ask myself if I'm one of the ones who has turned off the light. Have I dimmed the light when I don't greet the stranger sitting next to me in the pew unless the priest tells me to? Do I make the world darker when I'm too shy to say grace in a restaurant, or hesitant to wear a crucifix in my university classroom for fear of what people will think? Do black clouds gather when I gossip about somebody at work or retaliate against a perceived injustice, when I don't extend myself to lend a helping hand, excusing myself that I'm too tired or that I already did something good that day? When the fact that I'm Catholic is one of the last things people learn about me, rather than one of the first. It bears thought. If I'm going to be a witness and do my bit to keep God's light turned on in this world, then I have to make sure I'm walking the talk every day. I have to remember people are watching me, the Catholic woman in their midst, just like they're watching you, and we can't let them or Christ down. Watch yourself and watch your teaching. Persevere at both tasks. By doing so, you will bring salvation to yourself and all who hear you, writes St. Paul to Timothy. Watch ourselves. It's imperative that we do. And so I'd like to finish up by telling you 3 ways I think about self-care in the hopes that they will encourage you to take the best possible care of yourselves too. First, I try to be hyper-aware that people watch me. And once they know I'm Catholic, they're watching even more closely. Princess Diana once said that it was so hard for her to accept that a camera was trained on her all the time and that she had to learn how to behave accordingly. Now, I'm not Princess Diana, but I can't forget either that I'm always on stage and am sending a message, whether I realize it or not. I have to ask myself, what message am I sending? A few weeks ago, I came home from a trip on Southwest Airlines. The plane was full, and as we were disembarking, I found myself behind a mother and her little 5-year-old daughter. The 2 of them were so cute. Every time the mother did something, her daughter imitated her exactly. When the mother maneuvered her carry-on luggage so as not to get in the way of another passenger, her daughter did the same with her own little bag. When the mother thanked the flight attendant for a nice trip, the little girl said, "Thank you, too." And when the mother threw away a piece of trash paper in the trash bin, so did her daughter. Noticing what her daughter was doing, the mother smiled down at her little girl, who looked back up at her and said, "I do everything you do, Mommy." I smiled too, watching them, because it was wonderful to see a witness at work. Over and over, she was demonstrating values of consideration, kindness, and care with a piece of luggage, a word of thanks, and a scrap of trash paper. And her daughter was absorbing her values as she mimicked her behavior in each and every little instance. Marshall McLuhan, the communications scholar, said, "Our children are the messages about our values we send into the future." I'd say that mom was sending marvelous ones. But all of us who are parents know that there are those other days when we're exhausted and exasperated, and we answer a child's quizzical look about something we've done by saying, "Do as I say, not as I do." And in that moment, we've let one of those little failures in integrity happen that we never intend and are always trying to avoid. But we're tired or stressed or busy, and besides, it's just one time and nobody's perfect, and surely there's little harm done. But unless we stay vigilant and keep after ourselves day after day, before you know it, we've done more of the same everywhere. And when those little failures happen often enough, over a long enough period of time, we leave cynical people behind us who legitimately question whether a Christian life is really any different than any other kind. Gandhi said, "I have a great respect for Christianity, but the trouble is with you Christians. You do not begin to live up to your own teachings." Yes, Gandhi's words are harsh and overgeneralized, and we bristle. But 15 separate times in the Gospels, Christ warns of the same problem and boils it down to just 2 words: "You hypocrites." I know our Lord was talking to scribes and Pharisees, but if he were to spend a week in my company, would he ever have cause to look at me with pitying eyes and say, "Lisa, are you sure you aren't just being a teensy-weensy bit hypocritical here?" On some days, I'm afraid he would, and so my human weakness notwithstanding, I have to keep it myself, examining my behavior every day, looking for my big and little failures, and asking God again and again to help me get rid of them. I don't want my failed human nature to become an excuse for what is really a lack of self-awareness, a failure to pay attention to my effect on someone else, or sheer laziness. Saint Teresa of Avila said, "Be gentle to all and stern with yourself." It's good advice, worth taking to heart. At least it is for me. So now that I've quoted Gandhi, there's a famous old story about him, although probably apocryphal, that makes another important point about integrity. One day a mother came to seek the Mahatma's help with a problem she was having with her young son. He was eating far too much sugar, and she was worried about him. She tried and tried, but there was nothing she could do to get the boy to stop. And so she sought out Gandhi, whose guidance no one could ignore, to convince her son to stop his unhealthy behavior. Gandhi listened carefully while she explained the situation to him, and when she was finished, he did something she didn't expect at all. He didn't say anything. He simply nodded and asked her to come back again with her son in 3 weeks' time. Confused and disappointed, she went away, but in 3 weeks, she and her son were back again. This time, Gandhi sat the little boy down and told him about the dangers of eating too much sugar and told him how important it was to stop. The boy nodded his little head and agreed. Of course, the mother was delighted, and afterwards she thanked Gandhi. And she asked, "But why did you not tell this to my son 3 weeks ago when we were last here?" "Because," he replied, 3 weeks ago I too was eating too much sugar. How can I tell someone to stop doing something I'm doing myself? In these 3 weeks, I have stopped eating sugar, and now I can tell your son what he should do." Whether it's a true story or not, it's a good caution about the perils of trying to tell others to do something we're not doing ourselves. There is an inherent inauthenticity in such behavior, and when we get found out, trust is destroyed, and in an instant, the bridges we've been trying to build so hard collapse. Justifiably so. The world we are reaching out to depends on us to show that what we are teaching can actually be lived. Our work is too important to let ourselves get sloppy. I know this level of discipline is hard and it takes tremendous energy. That's why, in the interest of our own well-being, we must be constantly on guard against weariness. One of my graduate students once asked me what I thought was the hardest thing about being a teacher. The first thing that popped out of my mouth was stamina. It's absolutely true, isn't it? While the yoke of being a living model of our faith may be easy and the burden light, even the strongest mule gets tired after a long day in harness. How often have I seen eager, open-hearted young professors become disillusioned, cold-hearted ones simply because they were worn out? It's hard to be up for winning over a new group of students at each beginning of every session, semester or year, year after year, year after year. Our tiredness might show up first in bags under our eyes or in a short temper now and again, but the most telling symptom to watch out for is the one that feels pleasant as it destroys. On the way to Emmaus, Jesus asked the two men, "What were you talking about?" Their conversation, as you know, was brimming with the miracle of Easter. Now, if he'd run into a couple of us university professors, on the other hand, he might have heard, "Oh, we were just griping about the food in the cafeteria, commiserating about the extra work our department head has just loaded on us, complaining about the administration, and bemoaning our obtuse students." Do you hear an echo of your own conversations in mine? I imagine you do. We all have it rough, and it's only natural to complain to the people who will commiserate. But we have to watch out, because the first symptom of tiredness, going self-destructive, is complaining. While we feel good for a moment, blowing off some steam to a sympathetic ear, complaining that doesn't lead to problem solving only serves to harden our hearts in cynicism, and we become a dangerous source of our own and each other's discouragement. We must take these signs of discontent seriously and work at combating them the way we'd start watching what we eat if we noticed our pants getting a little tight. So here's what I do. I try to muster the energy to prune one disheartening conversation from my life every week. If one is going on around me, I don't participate. If one starts, I try to change the subject, or better yet, offer a way to deal with the problem my friend is complaining about. And God help me, I try never to be the one to start one. It's hard, but I find my heart is more buoyant when I try, and maybe so is someone else's too. By staying always vigilant, watching for the signs of creeping discontent and working to overcome them, we help keep our witness pure. Self-examination, prayer are always our best first lines of defense. But last, I want to stress how important it is to have a good friend, not to commiserate with, but to help us see the path of light and love in the midst of a world that will always be full of temptations to weariness and discouragement. I agree with St. Thomas Aquinas that there is nothing more to be prized on earth than true friendship. And I could not carry on without Alan and Joe, Brad and Paul, Mother Teresa, Benedicta, and Mary, although Mary has now gone home to God. They help me fight the good fight and keep running the race. They hold me to a standard of excellence and integrity. They want the best for me and for me to be my best. We all need friends who are striving to be models of integrity too, and who will point out our shortcomings, but always with love, and who will offer us guidance, encouragement, and comfort. They are our personal sons, keeping the petals of our hearts wide open and receptive to God. In the end, this hard work, cultivating, feeding, and pruning ourselves is so worthwhile. When we walk our talk with a smile on our faces and a spring in our steps, then people will look at us and say, "I admire her. I like being around him. How does she do it? Where does this light shining on his face come from?" In that moment, we have become the most powerful catechist there is, an educator, an evangelist, a witness, and we are doing great work in this world. So in honor of teacher witnesses everywhere, let me finish with a little hymn I'm particularly fond of. Help us, O Lord, to learn the truths thy word imparts, to study, that thy laws may be inscribed upon our hearts. Help us, O Lord, to live the faith which we proclaim, that all our thoughts and words and deeds may glorify your name. Help us, O Lord, to teach the beauty of your ways, that yearning souls may find the Christ and sing aloud his praise. Thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you for the work you do throughout our Archdiocese, and it has been an honor to be among so many people who are keeping our faith alive now and for generations to come. God bless you all, and with St. Paul, I pray that he may complete the good work he has begun in each of us.